On Christmas Eve, my daughter raised her glass and said, "Dad, the best gift would be you leaving this house for good." The room went silent as they laughed at the scarves I had knitted with my own hands. They thought they could humiliate me, freeze my accounts, even forge my signature to steal the 4.5 beach house I built. But what they didn't know was, I had kept every deed, every truth, waiting for the day to bring it all to light. Stay with me until the end, and comment your city so I know how far my story reaches. The house on Malibu's shoreline glowed with holiday warmth that night. Strings of lights framed the windows, their colors reflecting faintly on the rolling waves outside. The living room carried the scent of pine and cinnamon, laughter bouncing off the walls. To anyone else, it was the picture of Christmas joy. Yet, to me, each flicker of light only cast shadows of absence. Marjorie's chair sat empty by the fire, and in that emptiness lay the silence of 25 Christmases we had shared together. I tried to steady my breath as the room filled with voices. Damon, my grandson, leaned against the mantel, telling some joke that made his younger sister Elara giggle. They were my small anchors in the storm. My daughter, Roxanne, moved about like a hostess in control of her kingdom. Her husband Trent never far behind. Their voices carried a polished charm, though beneath it I often felt the edge of something sharper, something meant to cut. The gift exchange began with chatter and rustling paper, the sort of scene I once treasured. Names were called, ribbons untied. Applause followed. When my turn came, I reached into the bag beside my chair. My hands had labored over those scarves for weeks, knitting stitch after stitch while the ocean whispered outside my window. Marjorie had loved such gestures. She said they carried a part of the giver's soul. Just as I placed the first scarf in Damon's hands, Roxanne's voice sliced the air. "Dad," she said, her smile broad but her eyes cold. "The greatest Christmas gift would be if you stopped freeloading and let us manage things." The room froze. My ears rang as though the ocean itself had stopped outside. Every face turned to me, waiting to see if I would crumble. Heat rose in my chest, not from the fire, but from shame. A humiliation like that, served on a silver platter in front of blood and strangers alike, stung deeper than words could show. I forced my lips shut, swallowing the anger clawing its way out. Trent chuckled, breaking the silence. "Well, at least he brought us something," he said, unfolding the scarf with exaggerated care. "Oh, look, honey, Dad still thinks yarn is a treasure chest." Roxanne laughed softly at his side. A few guests gave nervous smiles. Most simply looked away. I sat there, watching my work passed around like a relic of foolishness. Damon's eyes dropped, guilt flooding his young face, while Elara clutched her scarf to her chest as if trying to shield me. But the damage had been done. A second wound layered neatly atop the first. The voices around me dulled, retreating to a distance I couldn't quite reach. Memories of Marjorie stirred, her hands touching mine as she once pulled on a scarf I'd made her. Her words gentle. "It's perfect, because it came from you." Those echoes stood in cruel contrast to Roxanne's mockery. I told myself not to break, not to give her the satisfaction. My jaw tightened, my gaze fixed on the fire. A father's silence is often mistaken for weakness, but silence can also be armor, and that night, I needed every scrap of armor I could muster. From the corner of my eye, I caught Roxanne and Trent whispering together, their lips curved in sly amusement, their glances darting my way. That smirk told me something far worse than mockery lurked beneath the surface. Christmas had always been about togetherness, but as I sat surrounded by family who treated me like a stranger, a chilling thought rooted itself. That night, I realized Christmas wasn't about family anymore. It was about pushing me out. The echo of laughter from the living room lingered behind me, each sound a reminder of how far I had fallen from the center of this family. The glow of the Christmas tree, once a beacon of Marjorie's warmth, now felt foreign, like it belonged to strangers. I retreated into the corner near the sliding glass doors, watching the waves roll in, steady and cold. The ocean had no care for broken fathers, no sympathy for men discarded by their own blood. The night air pressed against the glass, and I pressed my palm there too, as if I could push away the shame clinging to me. Every word Roxanne had spoken still vibrated in my chest, but it was Trent's voice that cut deeper when he came over, drink in hand, with that smug grin he always wore after a few whiskeys. "Maybe it's time you stop living here for free," he muttered loud enough for the others to hear. "We've carried you long enough." Carried me. Those words seared into me harder than Roxanne's cruelty. I had built this house, paid for every nail, every brick, every board that held the roof above their heads. Yet, in a single sentence, my son-in-law reduced me to a freeloader, a man living on scraps. The room hushed for a moment, some guests shifting uncomfortably, others pretending not to hear. I swallowed hard, keeping my anger pressed deep inside, because lashing out would give them what they wanted, a reason to paint me as bitter, senile, ungrateful. Later, I pulled Roxanne aside into the hallway, away from prying eyes. My voice was quiet, low. "Why do you let him talk to me that way? I'm your father." Her eyes, once filled with warmth when she was a little girl asking me to carry her on my shoulders, were now cold steel. "Dad," she said firmly, "you'll understand one day. It's better for everyone if you just step aside." Step aside, like I was an obstacle in her path. The finality in her tone told me there was no misunderstanding here. She wanted me gone, not just humiliated in front of friends, but erased from the very heart of the life I had built. I slipped on my coat and stepped out into the night. The December air bit my skin, but it was nothing compared to the sting inside. I walked down toward the stretch of sand where Marjorie once loved to sit at sunset, her hand wrapped in mine, whispering about the future we would watch our grandchildren grow into. Behind me, the house glowed golden, its windows spilling light into the darkness. I could hear faint bursts of laughter carried by the breeze. That laughter was no longer mine to share. The ocean roared louder as I reached the edge of the shore, drowning out my thoughts, my anger, even my voice. It was as if nature itself was telling me how small, how silent I had become in my own family's story. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside, not after being called a burden in my own home. So I sat in the old pickup truck parked by the curb, clutching the worn photo of Marjorie I kept in the glove compartment. Her smile still shone through the faded print, the only warmth left on this freezing Christmas night. As I leaned back against the seat, staring at the ceiling of the cab, I realized this wasn't just another family spat. This was the beginning of something much darker, something calculated. They weren't just mocking me, they were pushing me out. That night, I wasn't just leaving a party, I was being cast out of my own life. The chill of the morning air seeped through the cracked window of the truck, leaving my bones stiff and aching. Marjorie's photograph was still clutched in my hand, the edges bent where my grip had tightened in sleep. Her smile, frozen in time, was the only warmth I had left on that bitter Christmas morning. I tried to shake off the heaviness, convincing myself that a hot cup of coffee would do the trick. The corner store sat on the edge of the highway, the same one where Marjorie and I used to stop for pastries after church. I shuffled inside, nodding politely to the young cashier who greeted me without much interest. Reaching for my wallet, I handed over my debit card, already imagining the comfort of a steaming cup in my hands. The card reader blinked red. The cashier frowned and tried again, tapping the buttons harder this time. "Declined," she muttered. "That can't be right," I said, my voice trembling, though I tried to keep it steady. "Run it again." She did, and the machine displayed the words in cruel simplicity. "Account frozen." My stomach dropped as though the floor had vanished beneath me. I stepped aside, the coffee untouched, the curious eyes of a man behind me burning into my back. I dialed the bank right there, my fingers stiff as if they'd forgotten how to work. After the usual maze of automated voices, a young representative finally answered. "Sir, according to our records, your daughter, Roxanne Bledsoe, is listed as joint on the account now. New restrictions were placed yesterday." Her words struck like ice water. Roxanne. "My own daughter. I never approved this," I snapped. "This is my account. My money. I'm sorry. Mr. Avery, she replied, her tone flat, practiced. Legally, with her name on it. She has authority. You'll need to resolve this with her directly. Resolve it with her. As if betrayal could be handled with a polite conversation over tea, my voice faltered. She had no right, but the representative was already moving to end the call. Her voice rehearsed. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up, my chest tight. Money wasn't just money. It was proof I still had control over my life. Without it, I was less than a man. I was dependent. I needed sanctuary. Some place where eyes wouldn't pry into my shaking hands. The church seemed the only answer. So I walked the familiar steps that once gave me comfort. Christmas service was already underway, the choir's voices spilling into the cold air like ribbons of light. Inside, people smiled at one another, exchanging hugs and handshakes. When eyes landed on me, though, the warmth seemed to dim. One neighbor glanced away, whispering something to his wife. Another man patted my shoulder with a pitying smile, his words too soft for most ears, but not mine. Poor Luther. He doesn't even know where he is half the time. The phrase cut deeper than Trent's sneer, deeper even than Roxanne's cruel words the night before. Alzheimer's. That was what they were planting in the minds of people who had known me for years, not just humiliating me, but rewriting me. I sat in the pew, rigid, the stained glass windows glowing with morning light. Every note of the hymn echoed against the hollow in my chest. Their whispers weren't random. They were coordinated, seeded like weeds. Roxanne and Trent had taken one step further, stripping me of credibility. If they succeeded, the courts would listen to them, not to me. My neighbors would avert their eyes, convinced I was a man already gone. Back at the truck, I let the rage tremble through my hands. Not age, not sickness, rage. I looked at Marjorie's photo once more, her eyes filled with a kindness the world no longer had for me. They're trying to erase me, I whispered to her face, though the words felt like an oath to myself, because if they could convince the world I was losing my mind, they could take everything I had, every dollar, every memory, every stone of the house where she and I had built a life. The afternoon light had turned golden by the time I dialed Victor's number. My hands trembled as I held the phone, not from age, but from the sting of what I had heard at church. If there was one person left who knew me for who I really was, it had to be Victor. We'd played tennis together every Saturday morning for more than 2 decades. He'd seen me through Marjorie's illness, through the years of raising Roxanne on my own. I expected warmth. I expected normal. Instead, I was met with hesitation. His voice was soft, as if speaking to a stranger. Are you doing okay, Luther? I heard things. The words landed like a cold slap. He didn't need to explain. I could hear the rumor in the spaces between his syllables. Alzheimer's. Forgetfulness. The whisper campaign that Roxanne and Trent had planted was already sprouting in the soil of my friendships. I'm fine. Victor, I said quickly. Too quickly. The way a man speaks when he knows he isn't being believed. He chuckled nervously but didn't answer. The silence stretched. We should catch up soon, I tried, hoping to salvage something familiar. Yeah, maybe after the holidays, he replied. But his tone was off. His voice had the pity of someone who no longer saw me as an equal, but as a patient. Excuses followed, vague and slippery, about visiting his son, about travel, about his schedule. When the call ended, I sat staring at the phone, the ocean breeze seeping through the cracked window of my truck. The betrayal burned deeper than Roxanne's insults. Friends don't vanish overnight unless someone hands them a reason to doubt. And my daughter had handed them that reason, neatly wrapped in lies. By evening, I checked the mailbox outside the house. A glossy envelope gleamed in the fading light, the kind of expensive stationery you use when you want to impress. For a moment, foolishly, I thought it might be an apology, a peace offering, my name written in bold, maybe a Merry Christmas, Dad. But when I tore it open, I found a polished invitation to a New Year's Eve banquet. The location, my Malibu beach house. The house where Marjorie's laughter once filled every room, where we'd argued about paint colors and raised our child. The hosts, Roxanne and Trent Mallory, the guests of honor, Damon and Alara, my grandchildren, and my name, nowhere, as if I'd never lived, never sacrificed, never built those walls with my bare hands. I pressed my thumb against the embossed lettering. It was elegant, gold-foiled, meant to impress the neighbors. To them, it was an announcement of family unity, a proud gathering. To me, it was an obituary, not of my life, but of my place in it. I thought of Marjorie then. Her voice seemed to echo from the framed photograph that still hung on the mantel. "Don't let them erase you. Luther," I imagined her saying, as if she could see through the years into this moment. I set the invitation beneath her photo, my chest tight with a storm of humiliation and anger. My reflection in the glass looked smaller, diminished. For a moment, I felt like a ghost wandering the home I had built, watching the living prepare to replace me. "They've made it clear," I whispered to Marjorie's smile. "To them, I don't exist anymore." The house glowed behind me with warmth that wasn't mine, but as I stared at the invitation, something else stirred. They thought I would vanish quietly, like a candle snuffed out. They thought age had softened me into a man too weak to fight back. They were wrong if they thought I would disappear without a word. They had forgotten who I really am. The house had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that leaves your ears ringing. The invitation still sat beneath Marjorie's photograph, its gold letters winking in the lamplight like a dare. The ache behind my ribs wouldn't settle, without knowing why. My feet carried me down the hall toward the master bedroom, where the air always seemed cooler, still perfumed by the faintest trace of her favorite lily soap. I opened the door, reached for the small switch by habit, and the soft closet light hummed awake. Her dresses waited in their neat procession, a private garden of color and silk. I brushed a sleeve and felt summer weddings, cough syrup winters. Our last Thanksgiving when she laughed so hard at Damon's knock-knock joke she spilled cranberries on the carpet. The scent rose, linen, a whisper of perfume, time itself folded on wooden hangers. That closet had been my chapel in the months after she passed. On bad nights I stood here until my knees ached, listening to the hum of the bulb, talking to her as if the seams could answer back. A sound broke the hush, a soft scrape, then a laugh. I stepped deeper, and there she was, Roxanne, pivoting before the mirror in Marjorie's sapphire gown, the one we bought for our 40th anniversary dinner at Shutters. The fabric clung to her shoulders as she twirled, hair swept up, the skirt flaring around her as if the past were a costume to be borrowed for a minute and tossed aside. "It fits perfectly," she said, admiring her reflection, not noticing me yet. She lifted the hem and swayed, amused with herself. The hanger lay on the floor like a bent bone. Something inside my chest snapped taut. That gown had held the last warm day before the diagnosis. The sunset we watched from the pier as gulls wheeled and Marjorie leaned into my arm. Seeing it worn like party glitter turned my tongue to sand. "That was your mother's," I said, the words low, steady, colder than I felt. "Take it off." She didn't startle. She didn't blush. She met my eyes in the mirror with a coolness I'd known since she was 14 and discovered the magic of getting her way. "She's gone, Dad." A small shrug. "Clothes are meant to be worn, not rotted away in the dark." "They're not rotting." The scent of lily and starch rose sharper, as if defending itself. "They're resting. This is her space." Roxanne turned, the gown catching light. Space. Closets are square footage. We've got guests coming for New Year's, and the house needs to feel alive. People remember the hostess in a statement dress. She smoothed the bodice. "This is a statement." "That dress isn't a statement," I said. "It's a memory. It belongs to the woman who made this house a home." She tilted her head, pity dressed up as patience. "You talk about the house like it's a church. It's a house, Dad, and someone has to manage it." Her eyes flicked to the doorway, toward the invitation on the mantel I'd left like a warning flare. "You'll understand one day. It's better for everyone if you step aside and let us take care of things. Heat climbed my neck. A slow scald I fought to keep from my voice. Taking care of things doesn't mean emptying your mother out of her own closet. It means being practical. She slipped a hand into the gown's pocket like she'd worn it for years. And when the house is ours, we'll decide what to keep. You should get used to it. The line fell with practiced ease, the way Trent says numbers don't lie when a decision hurts someone he's never met. There was the mask slipping, not remembrance, ownership. I saw the plan the way a surveyor sees property lines. Freeze the accounts, circulate rumors, exclude my name from my own address, and dress the takeover in the language of caregiving. Make it look like safety. Make the father into a patient. Make the house into an asset. Yours? I asked gently, as if clarity could save us. The deed says otherwise. She smiled the kind of smile people reserve for polite strangers. Deeds change. Trustees step in for the impaired. It's not personal. It's for the best. A sound rattled in my chest that might have been a laugh if it hadn't tasted of salt. Impaired, I repeated, and the bulb above buzzed a little louder, like it, too, knew the word was a lie. Roxanne reached behind her neck for the zipper. Don't be dramatic. I'm honoring Mom more than you are. You hide her away. I bring her out where people can see. You're wearing her absence, I said. There's a difference. For a heartbeat. Something flickered in her face. An old shadow. A girl who used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms and knot her fingers in Marjorie's nightgown. Then it was gone. We're done arguing, she said, stepping out of the gown as carelessly as a tide pulling off the shore. She draped it over a chair, inside out, the lining exposed like a turned skin. There's a lot to do before the party. She brushed past me, the closet light bright on her shoulder as she went. Don't sit up waiting, she added from the hallway, tone almost cheerful. Trent's drafting a schedule. You'll see it on the fridge. When the hallway swallowed her, I lifted the dress and set it back on its wooden hanger. My hands shook in tiny arcs. The fabric remembered a woman who asked me to slow dance in the kitchen while soup simmered. The hook caught, and the gown hung straight again, lambent under the bulb. They wanted to bury me while the body still breathed. They wanted to fold the father into a roomer and hang him beside winter coats. Standing there, palm on the silk, a small coal of resolve found air. Age hadn't sanded off the part of me that could build a foundation from nothing. It had merely quieted my voice until I used it with care. In the bedroom mirror, a pale man looked back, more bone than I remembered, but his eyes were steady. The invitation had tried to write me out. The gown had tried to sell me a kinder version of theft. Both had failed to understand the simplest truth. I know this house the way a captain knows his boat. Every board, every nail, every creak in the storm. I know what holds and where the rot begins. I turned off the closet light and stepped into the corridor. Fists closing and opening like old hinges. Laughter floated from the far end of the house. Trent's voice rising bright with plans. A calendar would appear on the fridge. A timetable on when I could exist in my own rooms. Schedules are for flights and trash pickup, not father's. They won't just take the house, I murmured, passing the mantle. They'll try to steal what's left of her. The invitation glinted without shame. I picked up Marjorie's photograph, held it close until the glass warmed in my hands. If her memory was the last tether holding me here, they had just reached for the rope. They expected me to let go. They were going to learn I still knew how to tie knots. The morning after that awful night came too soon. A sharp knock rattled my front door, dragging me out of uneasy sleep on the couch. For a moment, I thought it might be a neighbor or perhaps Damon checking in, but the sound was too firm, too official. When I opened the door, a courier in a neat uniform handed me an envelope marked in bold red letters, Urgent Legal Notice. The weight of it felt wrong, cold, heavy, like stone pressed into my hand. Even before tearing the flap, a pit grew in my stomach. I carried it to the kitchen table, my fingers trembling as though they already knew what waited inside. The papers slid out in a stiff shuffle. At the top, I saw the words transfer of partial ownership, and beneath them, my beach house address spelled out in black ink. My house, my sanctuary, my wife's sunsets, my grandchildren's sandcastles, my whole life. And there, at the bottom, my name was scrawled in looping letters. My name, but not mine. The signature looked almost right. The curve of the L a little too careful. The Avery drawn with hesitation I never had. It was an imitation, and yet close enough that a court might believe it. My throat tightened. They hadn't just mocked me at Christmas or frozen my accounts. They had gone for the foundation, trying to erase me on paper. The ink itself felt like chains, shackles I had never agreed to wear. I stumbled back into my chair, clutching the page until it crumpled. Betrayal wasn't just a word anymore. It was there in front of me, black on white, binding me to a crime I hadn't committed. Roxanne and Trent had moved beyond cruelty. This was strategy. I needed help, and quickly. My fingers shook as I dialed Cassandra Miles, the elder law attorney who had once given me her card at a community seminar. When her voice came through, sharp and clear, something inside me steadied. I told her about the envelope, about the forged signature. "Don't say another word until I see it," she said firmly. Within minutes of scanning the document I sent over, she confirmed what I already knew. It was a forgery. Her tone turned grave. "Luther, this is more than a mistake. They're laying groundwork. If this gets entered into the county records, you could be declared no longer the rightful owner. They're trying to push you out legally." The words hit like waves against a brittle dock. My daughter, the little girl who once tugged my sleeve at school recitals, was now plotting to erase me with the stroke of a pen. I swallowed hard, listening as Cassandra laid out what came next. "You need every original document you have, deeds, bills of sale, tax records, anything that proves your ownership. Make copies and secure them in more than one place. And be careful, this may not be the first document they forged." The room spun for a moment. If one signature could be copied, what else had they done in my name? Yet in the middle of my fear, a strange clarity settled in. Silence could no longer be my shield. It had to become my weapon. If they wanted to fight with paper, I would fight with evidence. I walked to the study, where a drawer sat locked beneath Marjorie's old desk. It was the place we had always kept our records, a drawer she guarded with the seriousness of a safe. My hands lingered on the brass handle before turning the key. The papers lay neatly inside. Deeds, receipts, and ledgers. The bones of a lifetime. Relief stirred, but only for a moment. Beneath the stack rested an envelope yellowed with age, my name scrawled in Marjorie's handwriting. I froze. She had been gone for years, and yet here she was, speaking to me through ink and paper. My pulse thundered in my ears. If they wanted a war of signatures, maybe Marjorie had left me the first weapon. The envelope sat heavy in my palm, its faded edges worn as if Marjorie had pressed it into my hand herself long ago. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it slowly, afraid of what might spill out. Not ink, but memories too sharp to handle. Inside, a single piece of stationery bore her familiar handwriting. My breath caught as I read the words, "Never let anyone write your story for you." Tears blurred the page. It was as though she had reached across the years to steady me in this storm. All the nights she'd urged me to keep records, to guard every document, came back now like a prophecy fulfilled. They were trying to erase me, and she had known the danger before I did. Sorrow weighed heavy, but beneath it stirred something else, resolve. By afternoon, that resolve was tested. Trent Mallory's smirk showed before his words ever did. He lingered outside the house with a neighbor, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "You know, Luther," he said with a laugh, "sometimes he doesn't even remember what day it is." "Poor guy's slipping." The neighbor chuckled awkwardly, eyes darting away when they noticed me watching. It stung worse than I wanted to admit. My mind was still sharp, yet their whispers painted me as something less. Later, when I returned to the mailbox, an envelope waited with no return address. Inside lay a doctor's note, crisp and official-looking, declaring me cognitively impaired and in need of guardianship. My stomach turned cold. It was a lie, plain and calculated. They weren't waiting for me to fail. They were planting evidence to prove it. Anger surged, but it had edges of fear. If such a paper landed in the wrong hands, It could become the truth overnight. My name, my competence, my dignity, all rewritten by a forgery. The words of Marjorie's note echoed in my head. Never let anyone write your story. I folded the falsified document carefully, slid it into my pocket, and decided I wouldn't stay silent. When I stepped into Roxanne's home that evening, the air was tight with perfume and something sharper, defiance. She stood near the fireplace, Trent lounging like a king beside her. "Dad," she said, "too sweet. To what do we owe this surprise?" I held up the falsified note. "This? Care to explain why a stranger's handwriting is trying to decide my fate?" Her eyes flickered, but she didn't falter. "You're imagining things, Dad. You've been under stress. Maybe you're misreading the situation." Trent snorted. "Paranoia's a sign, too, isn't it? Fits right in with what the doctor said." The words burned, but I kept my voice steady. "Be careful. I've been silent, but I've not been blind." Behind them, Damon and Alara had appeared in the hallway. My grandson's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. My granddaughter looked away, uneasy. The silence between us felt heavier than the lies hanging in the air. Then Roxanne's tone shifted, sharp and decisive. "Fine," she said. "If you won't listen, we'll make this official. We're calling a family meeting. Everyone deserves a say about what's best for you, and for the house." The words landed like a gavel. They weren't satisfied with gossip or forged papers. They wanted a stage, a verdict delivered under the pretense of family unity. I left their house without another word, but my mind was racing. Cassandra's voice on the phone steadied me. Gather documents. Prepare testimony. Inez Calder had witnessed enough in that home to stand with me. Harold Vexler, my old lawyer, still knew the paper trail. By the time I returned to my desk, I no longer felt like prey. I spread the papers Cassandra had advised me to collect, lining them up like soldiers. They wanted to put me on trial in my own house. I whispered to Marjorie's picture. So let them try. But when the family gathered and the voices began to rise, the first one raised against me wasn't Roxanne's or Trent's. It came from a place I never expected. The fire crackled in the hearth, but it gave no warmth. I walked into the living room of the beach house, the one I had built with my own hands, and felt the chill settle in my bones. They were already there, Roxanne and Trent at the head of the long table, postured like judges. Damon and Alara sat side by side, both looking uneasy, though Damon's jaw was set in a way I hadn't seen before. Inez lingered near the wall, her hands folded, eyes darting between me and the others. Every chair seemed occupied with tension, the smell of wood smoke mixed with perfume and cologne, but all I felt was the icy air of judgment. I sat down slowly, my heart heavy, already knowing this wasn't a family meeting. And it was a trial. Damon spoke first. His voice, usually warm, came out colder than the sea breeze outside. "Grandpa, maybe they're right. Maybe it's time you let them handle things." The words didn't just sting. They split something inside me. Damon, the boy who once held my hand at Little League games, now parroting their poison. I stared at him, searching his face for some crack of doubt. But he looked away. Betrayal has many shades, but hearing it from your grandson is the darkest of all. Roxanne seized the silence. She stood, holding papers like a prosecutor. "Dad, you've been slipping. Misplaced your keys 3 times last week. Forgot about Damon's recital. And this?" She waved a sheet dramatically. A doctor's note suggesting early signs of decline. Trent leaned in with his smug grin. "And let's not forget property taxes. 2 years late. That kind of negligence puts everything at risk." "We're just trying to protect what's left." Their voices swirled together, accusations dressed as concern. Every word was a knife disguised in silk. My chest tightened, not from guilt, but from the sheer audacity of it all. The house echoed with their staged performance, each one playing a role in a show meant to erase me. I let them finish. I let their pile of lies stack high enough to wobble. Then, without a word, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder. Inside were the originals, deeds, receipts, proof of every tax payment, signed and dated. I laid them gently on the table. The room fell silent. Roxanne's smile flickered. Trent's smirk faltered. Damon's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw the boy he once was, caught between loyalty and manipulation. My voice was steady, not loud, but firm enough to cut through the smoke and silence. You've mistaken my silence for weakness, but I've kept records. Every scrap of truth. Lies may spread fast, but facts don't burn so easily. I leaned forward, meeting Damon's eyes directly. Son, remember who built this house, and who's trying to burn it down. For a moment, there was only the sound of the fire, popping and snapping. I thought I had pushed back enough to steady the ground beneath me. But then Trent, calm as a man who knows his next card is sharper, slid a manila folder across the table. He smirked as he tapped it with his finger. This is the evidence you can't talk your way out of. Trent's smirk told me he thought he had already won. He slid a manila folder across the table, tapping the edge like a dealer stacking a hand. The flap opened, and photographs spilled across the polished wood, grainy shots of me slumped in a chair, head hanging, one with a bottle planted near my hand, another of me staring blankly at the garden as weeds crept through. Gasps filled the room. Damon shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away. Roxanne leaned back with her arms folded, lips curled into a look that stung deeper than words. Every second of silence around the table painted me guilty. I leaned forward, picking one up. The angles were wrong, the lighting inconsistent, staged. Whoever arranged them had worked carefully enough to fool anyone who wanted to believe I was fading. My voice caught low in my throat, but I held it steady. These are lies. Trent raised a brow, feigning pity. Pictures don't lie. Luther, maybe you just don't remember. The humiliation pressed in, heavy as the ocean tide beyond the windows. My own family staring at me like a stranger. Rage burned, but I swallowed it, refusing to give them the outburst they wanted. Roxanne seized the moment, her voice smooth and sharp. See? This isn't just about forgetting. This is about endangering all of us. Dad, you can't be trusted anymore. Elara shifted in her seat, her voice small. Grandpa, is it true? The words pierced more than Trent's folder of fabrications. My granddaughter's eyes, usually so warm, flickered with doubt. The walls of my own home, built from sweat and sacrifice, felt like they were closing in, the laughter of past holidays echoing like ghosts. I steadied my breath, clenching my fists under the table. The fight wasn't just for property. It was for the memory of Marjorie. For every sacrifice erased by the venom of my own blood, the silence cracked. A voice I hadn't expected rose, clear and firm. Inez Calder, my housekeeper for decades, stepped forward from the corner where she had lingered. That's a lie, she said, her accent thick, her hands trembling but strong. I was here that night. Mr. Avery never touched a drop. All eyes swung to her. She raised her chin, defying Roxanne's glare. Those pictures, staged. I cleaned that room myself. The bottle was empty, pulled from recycling. The air shifted. Doubt flickered through the tribunal Roxanne had staged. Damon's jaw tightened, caught between loyalty and truth. Relief rushed through me. Fragile but real. For the first time, someone else had placed themselves between me and their web of lies. Harold Vexler, the old lawyer and longtime friend, cleared his throat. His voice carried the authority of years in courtrooms. If I may, he said, adjusting his glasses, the timestamps on these photographs are inconsistent. Look closely. Some read midnight, others midday, all stamped on the same date. Roxanne snapped back, her voice louder than she intended. This is none of your concern, Harold. But it was too late. Her loss of composure hung in the air, a crack in her facade. The room wasn't hers alone anymore. Damon, who moments before had doubted me, studied the photos again. This time, his eyes didn't avoid mine. They searched, wavering, questioning. A tremor of hope stirred where despair had threatened to settle. I stacked the photographs neatly, pressing them together like cards in a house built on lies. My voice dropped, steady as stone. Every empire built on deceit eventually collapses. Tonight, I saw the first crack. No one spoke. The fire snapped in the hearth, the only sound in the silence that followed. I looked each of them in the eye, lingering longest on Damon. The truth always finds its way through, remember that. But the calm didn't last. The folder in front of me was only the beginning. Something darker still brewed beneath their schemes. The sound of fists against my door woke me before the sun had fully risen. It wasn't the kind of knock neighbors used, tentative and polite, but the firm rhythm of authority. Pulling my robe tighter, I shuffled across the hardwood floor, the Pacific surf murmuring faintly outside. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood on the porch, the morning light slanting across their uniforms. "Mr. Luther Avery?" one of them asked. His tone was steady, rehearsed. "Yes," I answered, though my voice cracked more than I intended. He held out a folded document sealed with an official stamp. "You've been served. Summons to appear on charges of fraud related to property transfers." The words landed heavier than the ocean itself. Fraud, property transfers. I took the paper with shaking hands, my stomach hollowing as if the ground beneath me had tilted. Behind the officers, I noticed neighbors pausing on their morning walks, heads craning. Malibu gossip traveled fast. Soon everyone would know. I closed the door slowly, leaning against it. For years, that house had been my refuge, the last place where Marjorie's presence lingered. Now, even its walls seemed to echo the accusation printed on that summons. Later that morning, muffled voices reached me through the hallway. Damon's voice, tense and angry, carrying down from the kitchen. I stepped closer, unseen, listening. "Mom, this has gone too far," Damon said. His tone was sharper than I'd ever heard him use with Roxanne. Roxanne fired back. Her words clipped. "We're protecting the family. Damon, he doesn't see what's best anymore." Trent's voice slithered in like smoke. "Stay focused. Roxanne, the plan only works if no one breaks rank." A chair scraped loudly, followed by silence. I could picture Damon's face, torn between blood and truth, caught in a net they'd woven. Alara remained quiet, her footsteps light as she moved toward the back door. Even she couldn't look me in the eye anymore. My heart sank, but a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred. Hope. Damon's doubt was a crack, and cracks, if widened, could collapse walls. That afternoon, I sat with Cassandra Miles at her office, the summons spread across her desk. She studied it with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "They're tightening the noose," she said, sliding the papers back toward me. "But only because they feel it slipping. This move is desperate." Her words steadied me more than I expected. For days, I had felt cornered, like prey. But hearing her frame it as desperation gave me strength. "They've even roped Damon into this mess," I muttered. Cassandra's brow lifted. "Good. Doubt in their camp is leverage for us." When I left her office, Harold Vexler was waiting on the steps, leaning on his cane but sharp as ever. He nodded toward the papers in my hand. "These summonses cut both ways. Luther, if we prove malicious intent, they'll be the ones answering questions in court." The idea lodged itself firmly in my chest. Maybe this wasn't just about defense anymore. Maybe it was about turning the tide. That evening, I sat alone on the deck, the Pacific stretching endlessly before me. The gulls circled, dipping toward waves that rolled in steady as breath. Marjorie's old locket lay in my palm, the chain warm from my skin. I could almost hear her voice, steady, gentle, commanding me not to bow, not to let them erase me. Resolve filled the silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt something solid under my feet. I whispered into the sea air, "They'll find out soon enough. I'm not leaving." Night fell heavy, shadows gathering at the edges of the house. When I stepped into the hall, my foot brushed something on the floor. An envelope, plain and unmarked, had been slid under the door. I bent down slowly, the stiffness in my knees forgotten as I read the words scrawled across its front. Proof: do not trust Roxanne. Inside, a small USB drive glinted under the light. My pulse quickened. Someone out there knew the truth. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning to roar. The laptop hummed softly on Harold's old oak desk, its glow the only light cutting through the December night. My hands trembled as the files appeared, each one stamped with dates that matched the weeks when my life had begun to unravel. Harold leaned forward, his face drawn tight, as I clicked the first audio clip. Roxanne's voice filled the room, sharp, deliberate, chillingly calm. Once the court believes he's unfit, the house is ours. Then Trent's chuckle followed, smooth and cruel, like someone savoring a victory already won. The sound hollowed me out. For weeks I had felt their cruelty in whispers, in sideways glances, in forged papers, but now I was hearing the dagger in their own words. Marjorie's locket, warm in my pocket, felt heavier with each second. Her warning in that envelope, "Never let anyone write your story for you," suddenly burned in my memory as if she had been standing in the room beside me. I sat back, staring at the wavering cursor on the screen. My knuckles were white around the armrest of Harold's chair. He cleared his throat softly. "This is the proof you needed, Luther. It's their voices, their plan. No one can deny it now." Grief surged through me like a tide. To hear my daughter reduce me to nothing more than an obstacle. It wasn't just betrayal, it was desecration. Somewhere inside, though, the sorrow tightened into something sharper, something closer to resolve. They had played their hand, and now it was my turn. The next evening, the family gathered again in the living room of the beach house I built with my own hands. The ocean pounded outside, as if it too wanted to crash through the walls. Roxanne and Trent sat together, confident smirks painted on their faces. Damon and Alara looked uneasy, their eyes flicking nervously toward me as I stood by the fireplace. Without a word, I placed the laptop on the coffee table and pressed play. Roxanne's voice sliced through the room once again. "Once the court believes he's unfit, the house is ours." The air snapped still. Alara's hand flew to her mouth, a gasp muffled behind her palm. Damon's face went pale, his body stiffening like he'd just been struck. Trent leapt up, his voice booming. "This is fake!" But Harold was ready. He stepped forward, holding up the metadata, pointing out timestamps, layering proof upon proof until even Trent's bluster couldn't fill the silence. The room's energy turned, suspicion no longer aimed at me but pressing hard against them. Roxanne's jaw clenched. For a moment, the mask slipped and the fury beneath it was exposed. She looked at Damon and Alara, eyes wild, but they weren't meeting her gaze anymore. Damon's voice broke the silence. "Wow, Grandpa," his words faltered, shame pulling them down. "I doubted you. I thought maybe Mom was right. But this is different. I was wrong." Alara's tears spilled freely as she gripped my hand. "I'm so sorry. Grandpa, I should have believed you." Her voice cracked with the kind of innocence that still knew love, even if it had been clouded. But Roxanne, she stood, her face red with rage, eyes glittering with hate. "This proves nothing. You think one recording erases years of decline. You'll see. The court will see." She stormed out, the door slamming like a gunshot. Trent followed, throwing back a final threat. "This isn't over, old man. You can't win against us." The house fell into silence, only the hiss of the fire and the waves outside filling the cracks they had left behind. Damon and Alara sat close but wordless, their guilt thick in the air. Harold closed the laptop with a snap. I leaned back, my breath steady now. Proof had its power, but as I looked at the fractured faces of my grandchildren, I knew Harold was right. Proof doesn't heal. It only sharpens the knife between what was once whole and what would never be again. That night, staring into the quiet flames, one truth carved itself deep into my chest. I had exposed them. I had proof. But the battle wasn't over. And as the night fell quiet, I knew the final blow was yet to come. The wooden doors of the Los Angeles Superior Court swung heavy as I stepped inside, cane in hand, Cassandra on one side and Harold steady on the other. The room smelled faintly of polish and old paper, a reminder that lives were judged here long before mine. Across the aisle sat Roxanne and Trent, dressed sharp, their faces painted with the smug certainty of people who believed they had already won. My chest tightened, but I straightened my back. This was the fight of my life, not for money, not for a house, but for my name. The judge called the case, his gavel echoing like a crack of thunder. The matter of my competency and the control of the beach house, my house, Marjorie's and mine, was laid bare before strangers. My breath came shallow as Roxanne's lawyer rose first, voice smooth and rehearsed. He painted me as an old man slipping into confusion, unable to manage property, too frail to make sound choices. Each word chipped away at my dignity like sandpaper on wood. The courtroom listened, some nodding, some whispering, as if my life was a story they could rewrite with ease. Cassandra stood, her voice firm, clear. She reminded the court that dignity is not erased by age. Then she pressed play on the recordings. Roxanne's own voice spilled into the silent chamber, cold and calculating. Once the court believes he's unfit, the house is ours. The air shifted. Whispers rippled like a sudden tide. Trent's color drained. Damon bowed his head. I watched my daughter's smirk vanish, her mask crumbling as her words betrayed her better than any witness could. Gasps echoed when Inez stepped forward, her testimony steady. She spoke of years she'd worked for me, of how she never saw confusion in my eyes, only patience, only steadiness. Harold added the legal records, the deeds, the bills, all lined with my careful handwriting. The judge listened, brows knitting. Roxanne's voice rose, shrill with desperation. "He's selfish." But the judge silenced her with a firm strike of the gavel. Trent shifted in his seat, then stood as if to leave, muttering about not going down with this. His chair scraped against the floor, leaving Roxanne exposed in the center of the room, her allies falling away. Damon finally raised his eyes, voice trembling but clear. "Mom, enough. This isn't right." Elara clutched his hand, nodding, their gazes turning toward me with shame and a promise of loyalty. The judge's decision came swift and firm. I retained full ownership of the beach house. My competency was upheld. Roxanne's conduct, however, was referred for investigation, attempted fraud, forgery, and malicious intent. She stood frozen, face pale, as the very system she tried to manipulate closed in on her. It was poetic in its cruelty. She had wanted the house at any cost, and in the end, her schemes left her with nothing. As the gavel fell, I felt no triumph, only release. Justice doesn't erase scars, but it restores dignity. Damon and Elara walked with me as we left the courthouse, their steps slower, steadier, as if they finally understood the weight I had carried. The winter sun bathed the steps in pale light, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply without the taste of fear. That evening, standing on the deck of the beach house, I held Marjorie's locket in my hand. The Pacific stretched wide before me, endless and calm. We made it. Marge," I whispered. "Family built on greed collapses. Family rebuilt on truth endures. Betrayal had cut me deep, but truth had carried me through. And for anyone my age who feels their voice no longer matters, remember this: dignity is worth defending, no matter the cost."